absolutely delighted to have the opportunity to launch Annetta's book. As Claire said, and Claire, thank you for having us, I first met Annetta in the early 1970s, and when I met Annetta, I was strongly aware of an indefinable aura of glamour about this person. And partly it was her own strong, vivid personality, which you know hasn't changed, and partly it was the fact that she was a product of this romantic old world culture, and the child of what to me was a glamorous communist country, the one that was at that time easiest to admire without knowing a great deal about it, which I didn't. Yugoslavia, of course, home of Tito's communism light. So Annetta used to talk sometimes in those days about her school days, and I was always struck by a sense of easy collegiality that she conveyed in those stories. And it was the antithesis of my experience. I was at that time working through an undergraduate degree, and the way we did it was to hunch in our little library corrals over our books and jealously guard our gems of knowledge as we mined them from our sources. And it seemed totally different to the sort of experience of education that Annetta will talk about. And when you read Chestnut Street, which I know you will, you'll come across a story such as that one that I'm describing, where she tells about the way that she would write 2 essays every week on the prescribed creative writing topic. One for the use of classmates who were having trouble with the topic, what we would have called compositions in the old days. And similarly with her maths homework, she would do an extra copy for students who were having difficulty to take and pass off as their own with minor adjustments. So you'll find out that Zagreb school students were at school either for a morning or an afternoon session, not for the 9 to 4 days at school that we always had, and which by design left us no time before or after for hanging around together, for going to cafes, for talking to each other, for forming, relationships with people of the other sex or the same. And I used to think, what bliss, how sophisticated. And it was, and I still think so. Then you'll read about that system in this book. So I felt, I suppose, that this young woman that I was getting to know back then was the product of an altogether more civilised system that fostered comradeship and confidence. And for starters, I couldn't imagine living in an apartment in the middle of a grand old town with so much history behind it, instead of in a suburban box where we didn't live and know our neighbours. And now that I've had the pleasure of reading Annetta's beautiful memoir, I realise that my impressions were quite superficial and only went a certain extent. I realised that the history that most affected her family, of course, was the immediate past, which was the Second World War, into which some of her family members disappeared. Her father, who was a pharmacist and a most unlikely soldier, was mobilised into the army and only discharged in the wake of a dangerous illness. And the very first scene that Annetta sets up in the memoir from her childhood shows her 3-year-old self having been coached to recite a patriotic slogan for the benefit of a soldier who was sharing the apartment with her parents. In the heat of the moment, she gets up on the chair instead and parrots the words that go along with the Catholic sign of the cross, which could have had quite serious consequences, but luckily didn't. So, with the benefit of an analytical and scientifically trained and politically astute mind, and decades to reflect on the meanings of those early years before her migration with her mother, brother and stepfather to Australia in the mid-60s, Annetta lays out in this book, Chestnut Street, with a sure touch, a delicate tracery of family history into which ran channels from generations of wars, class struggles, property, status struggles, individual rebellions and acts of defiance, lives full of either conformity or bohemianism. And she does this by focusing on the important relatives in her young life, piecing together their life stories and recollecting their characters and bringing them to life for us. But the tone of the writing is anything but dry and distant. in recalling her childhood, she's quite unabashed in recreating that supreme egoism that drives all childhoods, when we know that we are, as she tells her Mama, very unlikely ever to die. We are quite justly the apples of our parents' eyes, and we're convinced that very bright futures await us. So we are intensely and vividly there in the apartment on Chestnut Street, living among these bright and opinionated adults of several generations, party with Aneta to their discussions and disagreements, to the momentous political changes in the country as they filtered through to a bright child. We share the joys of living in a beautiful city and landscape, and the glamour of a forbidden religion that presented itself as daring subversion under a strictly godless state system. And the enchantment endures as we accompany this clever girl through her school days, meet her teachers, examine through her inquiring eye the intricacies of her friends' lives and how they prosper or otherwise according to their party status. We see from the inside and bit by bit, as Aneta works it out, that all is far from fair in the land of her birth. And in vivid snapshots we also witness family strains and rearrangements, partings and regular reunitings of parents in new situations and children in new locations. And then the adolescent Aneta appears, bit by bit, writing a typically tormented diary, exercising a strong will in a confined space, small rebellion by small rebellion, and forging unbreakable bonds with her relations, in particular with her loyal and indomitable aunt, her Teta Mira, that will last a lifetime. So in this confident, delightfully sharp and savoury memoir, you have in one a history of a now superseded but tremendously important era in the annals of Aneta's homeland, a period of enormous hope and idealism signified by that all-embracing and now defunct compendium named Yugoslavia, and a family portrait of great warmth and insight, a personal record marked by generosity of spirit, wit and intelligence, and a beautifully written text in the author's second language. So I heartily commend Chestnut Street to you all. I congratulate Aneta on her achievement, and I declare the book launched.
You know, it was worth writing a book just to hear.